Oh, it's Wednesday, June. We are in Takoradi, Ghana. Previously made stops, 3 stops in South Africa, a stop in Namibia, one in Angola. Now we're on the west coast of Africa in Ghana. And today we're headed towards Elmina Castle and Fishing Village and the Cape Coast Castle, which were both locations for the gold trade and also the slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade out of Africa. So I wanted to just show you what it looks like a little bit as we're headed towards Elmina. I mentioned when we're back in Angola that it would seem like a tough place to live, but I think Ghana may be even a couple of notches tougher. It's pretty, I would say, underdeveloped. uh, this, this castle was built by the Portuguese. Which made it do that 10 years before Columbus discovered America. Been here a long time. We passed several church buildings on the way, so I just took a snapshot of this one as we passed by it. But so it's been occupied at various times by the Portuguese, the Danes, Swedish, the Dutch, and finally last by the English. And finally Ghana gained its independence in 1957 from England and has been an independent country ever since. So you can see the castle we're headed to on the left-hand side, actually in the middle, underneath that cloud. You'll see it in a minute. It's a big white building on top of the point out there. On the way to the castle, we pass by the fishing village, which we're going to spend some time in after we visit the castle. And it is a chaotic place. And as we walk through that fishing village in a little while, you'll see there's some people that didn't like us taking pictures in there and got a little bit uncomfortable a few times. Anyway, this castle, as I mentioned, was built in 1482. It was the first one on the west coast of Africa, I think, and was key to the gold trade and also the slave trade. There's a restaurant at the castle, which we did not stop at. But I'd have a hard time eating at a place that such a terrible history, the slave trade. It's got a nice moat built right on the coast. And they subsequently built another, like an annex to the castle up on a hill. You'll see it in a minute when we do the panorama. But the Europeans that lived upstairs in the castle lived in luxury, while the slaves lived in the dungeons in just absolutely horrible conditions. Was nothing new to Ghana. In the pre-colonial period, before the European settlers came, there was indigenous slavery practiced here by the local tribes who captured others during wars and whatnot and then used them as slaves. So this particular castle here was set up by the Portuguese. That's a Portuguese church. Somebody went inside that building in the middle there and told us that's where that they were branded the slaves once they came in the castle. But this castle was used as a kind of a storage location before the ships came and picked them up and took them to the Americas, mostly Brazil, and some to North America. So this plaque says, "In everlasting memory of the anguish of our ancestors, may those who died rest in peace, and may those who return find their roots. May humanity never again perpetrate such injustice against humanity. We, the living, pledge to uphold this." So first step was to go into the woman's dungeon, and it's just beyond me how people could treat people like this. This is the area where they kept the women slaves when they were about to be purchased, so the people could come in and see what they look like. That's the governor up there, lives up in that room up there above the walkway. There's kind of a courtyard here, and there's 2 wells where they kept the water they gave to them. There's one there, you can see the round one, and then there's a square one right there. This is what the dungeons look like. They held hundreds of people at once. Not much ventilation. The women's side had a little bit more light than the men's dungeon did, but still appalling conditions to keep human beings in. There were a couple of hundred slaves in each one of these as they waited for the boats to come and pick them up. They passed through a door called the Door of No Return. When they loaded them on the ships, there's a hallway that went down there. There were no bathrooms in any of these dungeons. So on the men's side, there was kind of a trough that ran by gravity out, but I can't imagine what that must have been like. This is the men's side. It was a hot day that we visited. It's probably in the low 90s, very humid, so I can't imagine how uncomfortable it'd be in here with a couple of hundred people. Very little ventilation. And leading from both the men's side and the women's side, there was a tunnel that went down to this door. It was the Door of No Return. At this door, they passed and loaded onto the ships out there in the harbor. I think the water used to come up farther, closer to the fort. But anyway, they loaded them out this doorway, and they would never come back. Here's a panorama looking from the outside courtyard, and so it's a beautiful location right on the coast. So the local tribes would sell the slaves to the Portuguese, or later on the Swedes, the Danes, the Dutch, or the English, and then they would in turn sell them to the slaver ships that would deliver them to their various destinations in the Americas. And so these local tribes were complicit in acquisition and selling of the slaves. It wasn't the Portuguese that went and cleaned out the tribes. It was the local tribes that conquered each other. And it's no different than any place else in the world where that same methodology was used to take slaves of the people that you conquer. So be sure and take a look at part 2 of this video where we go visit the fishing village and then the Cape Coast Castle. And up on the hill over there on the left, you can see the other fort they built as an annex.